Right. Yeah, good evening, everybody. We've had one or two very minor technical hitches which we've overcome, so all being well, we're due now to make a start. My name's Andrew Davidson. I'm on the committee of the Welsh C20 company, and I'm introducing Adam. He and his wife Frances are well-known practicing architects in North West Wales. They're retired now, but Adam's had a wide variety of related interests which can follow through his published works, but they include major contribution to the Gwynedd volume of the Buildings of Wales, his monograph on Herbert North, a book about David Lee. He also worked quite a lot with ourselves at the Gwynedd Archaeological Trust on the characterization of urban areas, and his input there was invaluable. He's an accomplished musician, and he recently undertook a degree in fine art at Bangor. During all this time, Adam has also managed to publish an article in the Caernarfonshire Transactions on open-air schools. As we can see, that will be his subject tonight, and I'm delighted to hand over to Adam to tell us all about it. Thanks very much, Adam.
Fine, thank you very much. This is a scripted talk I made about 10 years ago, in fact, and I sort of resurrected it more recently because it seemed to me with the COVID around, of course, it has become rather more pertinent, and that's actually slightly gone off the boil now, hasn't it? But ironically, with this hot weather that we're having at the moment, we're back in the limelight, as it were, and these open air schools that I sort of discovered in my researches for the PEVSNA seem to be even more relevant now. So if you're all sitting comfortably, I shall begin. Just over 100 years ago, in 1912, a North Wales newspaper announced to its readers that 2 new schools of a novel type were being planned by the Caernarfonshire Education Committee at Brynner High near Clynogfawr and Four Crosses near Pwllheli. This new type was the open-air school, and it's clear from the committee's minutes, particularly once the schools were built, that its members were proud of their pioneering achievement. In this scripted talk, I will describe the background to the open-air movement, which began in the first few years of the 20th century and took hold in earnest in the 1920s and 1930s. And I will also explain the context in which the Caernarfonshire Education Committee carried out its experiment, who instigated it and why were the quiet rural communities of Brynner High and Four Crosses chosen as testbeds for this new type of school. The idea that a school could be more than a building just to accommodate pupils and might, through its design and layout, actually improve the health of those pupils, gradually began to develop towards the end of the 19th century, when the move towards mass education and a growing awareness of public health eventually forced a radical change in the purpose and nature of a school. The year 1870 might be taken as a suitable starting point for a discussion of this revolution in thinking. The establishment in this year of the school boards was the first step in organising a system of education that would eventually provide schooling for every child in the county. Every child in the country, rather. This is Wales, of course, and Britain too, as a whole. The bringing together of large groups of children in confined and often poorly ventilated schoolrooms highlighted the inadequacy of such conditions and the need to improve them. Edwin Chadwick, social reformer and colleague of Jeremy Bentham, presented a paper in 1871 to the Social Science Association titled on schools as centres of children's epidemics. And some years later, Dr. James Crichton Brown wrote a pioneering report on conditions in elementary schools. And increasingly, doctors began to take an interest in school design and its effect on children's health. The urban surveys carried out by Charles Booth in the 1890s and a decade or so later by Seaborn Rowntree made all too clear the poor state of the nation's health, so that when in 1899 the state took full responsibility for elementary education and established the Board of Education, it was not long before the medical profession was deeply involved. The new local education authorities, established in 1902 to build and administer the new schools, appointed medical officers who soon instigated medical examinations in every school. At the same time, architects were appointed to each authority, and these often worked closely with the medical officers. The most notable of the school's architects was perhaps George Widdows, who was county architect in Derbyshire, alongside Sidney Barwise, the medical officer, and continued designing schools into the 1930s. And more will be said about the Staffordshire and Derbyshire schools in due course. Before the end of the first decade of the 20th century, it was clear, at least to these county medical officers and architects, that the condition of the nation's children was far from ideal. If they were to grow into healthy adults who could contribute usefully to the nation's economy, there must be some way of improving their health, at least during their hours at school. Fresh air and sunshine were the simple answer, and it was soon realised that these could be plentifully provided in schools if the buildings were designed in a new way, on open air principles, more like some of the newer hospitals and sanatoria, rather than following the usual arrangement of classrooms clustered around a central hall, which had the benefit of being compact and good for supervision, but was unhealthy in terms of cross ventilation. In addition, and just as important, the daily routine would include physical exercise and periods of rest, sometimes with camp beds in the open or in resting sheds. Personal hygiene will be taught and meals will be provided. Inspiration for the early open-air schools in Britain seems to have come initially from Germany, where the first open-air school was established in Charlottenburg in 1904. It was, correctly speaking, an open-air recovery school, not a standard school, built for anemic children drawn from the overcrowded urban neighbourhoods of Berlin. The school was located in pine woods, and its accommodation consisted of open barracks and tent-like structures rather than permanent buildings. Further schools were built in Germany in 1906 and 7, and soon the idea spread to Britain. London's first open-air school was opened in 1907 at Bostle Wood, Plumstead, and a further two followed in 1908. Others were built elsewhere in Britain during the subsequent years, including schools at Aberbargoed, New Tredegar, and Mynydd Islwyn, all built around 1910 and 11 by the Monmouthshire Education Committee. Also at this time, two were built in Caernarfonshire, designed by the architect to the Education Committee, Roland LloydJones. As the open-air idea developed, so it also spread to the ordinary elementary school, with the result that the traditional central hall layout was gradually superseded by other plans. We return here to the early experiments of the county medical officers and architects in Staffordshire and Derbyshire, who pioneered some of these innovative layouts, often in the face of opposition from the Board of Education. They developed in slightly different ways the pavilion school, which effectively separated the classrooms from the hall so that the former could be cross-ventilated by windows on two opposite sides. And they were also called veranda schools, since access to the classrooms was often from an open covered veranda or sometimes from what was called a marching corridor, whose windows could open wide, thus providing cross-ventilation to the classrooms. Before turning to the Caernarfonshire experiment, it is worth describing just a few of these early schools, as some were rather remarkable and may well have inspired the members of the Caernarfonshire Education Committee. The Dorset Road School at Darlaston was one of the early experiments carried out in 1907 by the Staffordshire Education Committee. Their architect, John Hutchings, designed the school not as a single building with a hall at the core, but as three separate pavilions for boys, girls, and infants, respectively. And you can see that at the top left. Each block with an open veranda linking linear groups of classrooms. This allowed the rooms to have opening windows on two sides and some on three sides. The Board of Education, with Felix Kley as its chief architect and George Newman, the chief medical officer, thought there would be too much fresh air and light, but this did not deter the Staffordshire medical officer, George Reed, who went on to build many other open-air schools in the county based on the Darlaston example. The headmaster there had reported a great improvement in his pupils' health, and when Kley visited the school in 1908, he was pleasantly surprised that there was no smell in the classrooms. Letchworth Elementary School on the right here, built in 1909 and designed by the Hertfordshire County Surveyor, had a quadrangle at its centre. At one end was the hall, at the other end the infants' classrooms, and along the two long sides, classrooms facing both outwards and inwards to the courtyard through an open veranda. This compromise plan became quite popular as it provided the central hall for the traditionalists and also the ventilated classrooms for the open air supporters. R.G. Kirkby, chief architect for Bradford, was a keen advocate of open air education. In 1909, he proposed at Kley School a linear layout of rooms and departments linked along a covered way. Each building was freestanding, apart from its link to the spine, and thus allowed excellent cross-ventilation through every room, despite the uneconomic nature of the decentralised plan. Kley School was initially intended as a school for use just in the summer months, but the improvement in children's health was so marked when the school was kept open experimentally over the winter of 1909 to 10 that it remained in use throughout the year. Perhaps the most interesting open-air school was the one built by the Cadbury family at Uffculme near Birmingham in 1911. Here the architects, Cousins, Peacock and Bewley designed a series of 4 classrooms arranged in echelon so that they nearly touched each other at diagonal corners and were not even linked by an open veranda. Each classroom, about 6 meters or 20 feet square in size, had one solid wall facing north, and the remaining 3 walls were of glazed doors which could fold back, leaving just the pyramidal roof, the north wall, and 2 brick piers as solid enclosure. You can see those, the three little pavilions stepping back from each other in the middle of the plan. Architecturally, it was a remarkable achievement. Its clean, functional aesthetic was not only a complete contrast to that of the traditional board school, but was far in advance of its times, anticipating the later interwar generation of open-air schools, both in Britain and abroad. Returning now to our own county, the Caernarfonshire Education Committee was established in 1902 and it appointed Roland LloydJones as its architect in 1903. There were 33 applicants for the job from throughout Britain, and perhaps not surprisingly, Roland LloydJones of Caernarfon was selected. He already had a practice there, established in 1887, and he had designed numerous county and board schools as well as other buildings, so he must have been the clear favourite for this new post. It will be an arduous job designing the many new schools needed, as well as looking after and adapting the existing stock. And in 1905, he was already complaining to the Education Committee about the pressure of work put upon him and his staff of 3 assistants, 2 apprentices and a clerk. The committee obliged by appointing R.J. Williams as architect's assistant, quote, to hold office so long as the great pressure of work now experienced in the architects department continues, which it seems to have done right up to the outbreak of the First World War. Brynner High was in the list of proposed new schools put forward at a meeting in October 1904, along with Golan, Llanor, Brynengan and Chwilog, but many years ensued before the school could be built because of local arguments over its siting. In early 1909, the site had still not been agreed, and Brynner High School joined the list of new candidates for Board of Education approval in 1910, the others being at Betws-y-Coed, Cwmpenmachno, Penmaenros, Pentrefellyn, Capelillo, Beddgelert and 4 Crosses. It was only towards the end of 1910 that a suitable sunny site was found on the hill above Brynner High, and sketch plans could be prepared by Roland LloydJones. The minutes of a special meeting of the building committee record that it was being designed, quote, in such a way as to make it possible for the new school to be conducted partly on the open air principle without inconvenience or discomfort during any part of the year. It was resolved that the final sketch be approved with a view to those plans being adopted as a new type of elementary school building in and for the county. By now, the new school at 4 Crosses had reached sketch design stage 2, and both schools were built in 1911 and both opened in 1912. How did the open air idea reach this far corner of North Wales? One might expect that Dr. Parry Edwards, the county medical officer, would have been the prime mover, just as his colleagues had been in other counties in Britain. But there's no evidence of this in the Education Committee minutes of meetings held in the early 1900s. A comment in Roland LloydJones's job application to become architect to the Education Committee suggests that it was he who might have been the instigator. He is at pains in his application to impress on the committee his thoroughness and his diligence. He writes of his recent work, quote, in more than one instance, in connection with improving or altering or adding to existing schools, very serious difficulties arose as to how the building could be brought into line with the requirements of the building rules in the code then in force. And at the suggestion of the Board of Education, the school authorities asked me to interview the government architect, which I did, and by so doing, I obtained a much better idea of the practical working of their building rules than is possible by the mere reading of them in the Education Code. In other words, Roland LloydJones was undoubtedly conversant with all the current guidance and legislation affecting schools. You must have been aware that developments in school design across Britain, and also of Kley's own book, Modern School Buildings, published in 1902, and P.A. Robson's School Planning of 1911. Building journals such as The Builder reported the latest developments, showing photographs and plans of open-air schools and summarising papers given on elementary schools and hygiene at congresses held in Britain and abroad. The message was quite clear in an editorial of The Builder, which concluded an article on the school of the future with the following, quote, "Clearly, both abroad and at home, we are on the eve of a revolution in our educational methods, and it behoves architects to be alert and equipped to take their part in the movement that is now in progress. The public, too prone to regard architects as a conservative race of beings wrapped up in the traditions of their art, must be allowed no excuse for strengthening such an impression. In a matter of this importance, every architect interested in school buildings should be qualified to lead rather than to follow public opinion." Roland LloydJones was clearly not deaf to such exhortations. Whilst it may not have been the committee members who were responsible for introducing these new ideas to Caernarfonshire, it is clear that they, as an educational authority, were nevertheless proud of breaking new ground, since they decided to invite to the opening of Brynner High School the Secretary of the Welsh Department and George Newman, the Chief Medical Officer of the Board of Education. In the event, Newman was unable to attend, but he did visit the school with the County Medical Officer, Dr. Parry Edwards, in May 1913, and the school logbook records that he was highly pleased. In fact, he was impressed enough to ask his department to write to Roland LloydJones later in the year, requesting plans and photos of the two schools so that they could be included in his forthcoming annual report for 1911. A description of the Brynner High School was duly included in the report, and in the following year's report, a fuller description by Roland LloydJones was included, together with photos of the two schools. So this is a good moment to describe these novel open-air schools, and the description of Brynner High School in the earlier report will serve this purpose. Quote, "This school, which is a one-storey building of 3 classrooms accommodating 96 children, is so built as to face south with a marching corridor running the whole length of the interior of the building. There are glazed sliding screens which can be opened at will, this adding the whole width of the corridor to the hall or classroom. The corridor itself, when so added to the classroom, may also be subdivided. The exterior wall facing south is only built to a height of some 2 feet. The roof is sustained by pillars. From the top of the dwarf wall to near the roof and running the whole length are large bay windows, each made to open from the centre, the sections folding back completely, thus making the whole front of each classroom and main room from floor to ceiling, with the exception of some 2 feet, open to the outer air. In these bay windows, the scholars sit at lessons when the weather permits. On the north side are large sash windows, some of which are fitted with hoppers. Dormer windows are placed in the roof on the south side. Effective and continuous cross ventilation is thus secured, and when all the windows are open, an excellent open-air classroom is obtained. Playground space, school gardens and covered sheds are also provided, with accommodation for cookery classes and provision of meals. The total cost of the building was £1,820. I think an explanation should be given of this marching corridor that I've mentioned and the hall. At the two schools, there was no hall as such, but a large space could nevertheless be formed by sliding back the partitions between the classrooms. A hall was always useful at times of assembly, which many believed important for instilling in children a spirit of togetherness and patriotism. And of course, the hall could be used for physical exercise. The marching corridor was a more complex animal. It served as circulation space, clearly, and in many open-air schools, it could become part of the classroom. But it was also used for drill practice, a necessary part of the school curriculum which had appeared in the Code of 1871 and continued into the early 20th century, becoming particularly relevant in the years leading up to 1914. Excuse me. The school at Four Crosses was similar to that at Brynner High, but was larger and had a handicraft room in a wing at one end and infants' rooms at the other end. The two schools opened in 1912, and straight away the committee members were keen to make the schools known to the wider world. It was resolved, state the minutes of 22nd of June 1912, that the architect and secretary be authorised to offer facilities at all times for representatives of other educational institutions to examine the plans of the open-air schools, both at Brynner High and at Four Crosses. The logbooks show that visits to the two schools were made by other educational authorities. J.D. Butler from the Lancashire County Council visited Brynner High School in July 1912 and said he was delighted with the school. It will be difficult to conceive of anything better. The Clerk and County Surveyor of Montgomery visited in June 1913 and were much interested in all the arrangements. The Secretary of the County Councils Association came in October 1913 and wrote, "Have visited every county in England and Wales, but have seen no school so attractive as this, which appears to be a real model." And after Alfred T. Davis, Secretary of the Welsh Department of the Board of Education, had opened Brynner High School, he was keen that the operation of the school be monitored, and the building committee resolved to ask the schools to keep a record of all occasions when any casement window has to be closed at the new open-air school, together with the reason and duration of the closing, in order that exact information may be available from time to time as to the benefits which accrue to the children as a result of the provision of the new class of school provided. G.A. Humphreys, architect to the Mostyn estate in Llandudno, urged Roland LloydJones to give members of staff a lecture on ventilation, with special reference to the use of windows for cross-ventilation without drafts. How much of this advice reached the schools is unclear. Certainly the staff at Four Crosses received an instruction to keep windows open, and the head of Brynner High School records on 21st of April 1914, all the bay windows were fully opened all day. It is worth discussing at this point exactly how realistic the open air idea was in the climate of North Wales. In his annual report of 1911, George Newman had appreciated that in this county, i.e. Caernarfonshire, the problem the architect set himself to solve was to design a school building suited to a high altitude and which, while possessing all the essential conditions of a school held in the open air, would at the same time be capable of being transformed at will into an ordinary school building where the children will be protected from the weather in case of rain and high wind. Newman was clearly under a misapprehension about the altitude of Brynner High and Four Crosses, but he nevertheless realised that opening all windows wide in the dead of winter or during howling gales was unrealistic. And this is a point discussed by the committee with regard to the new school at Beddgelert, being mooted in 1909, given approval in April 1910, and opened in May 1912. Late in 1910, after tenders had been invited from builders, it seems that alterations to the plans were being suggested by Roland LloydJones on advice given by the Board of Education to replace the proposed marching corridor on the north side with a veranda in front facing south, which might be used, if necessary, or desirable for open-air teaching. But this idea was flatly turned down by the majority of the committee members due to the exposed character of the site. And this explains why Beddgelert School, though of the same vintage as Brynner High and Four Crosses, is of the more old-fashioned type, with corridor and hall, but not the big opening bay windows, which are the main distinguishing mark of the open-air schools. Betws-y-Coed School ran a parallel course at the same time to that taken by Brynner High and Four Crosses. But difficulties with finding a site agreeable to the local communities delayed its building. And then the outbreak of war postponed it until school buildings started up again in 1924 under a new Labour government. So this is Betws-y-Coed here with all windows open and all the children. And just incidentally, I'm proud to report that this school was listed by Cadw at my suggestion, since it's the only one of the Caernarfonshire schools where the folding windows still survive. The county probably cursed me, but there we are. It's good to see the windows still there in their original form. Roland LloydJones designed no further open-air schools before the First World War, nor after. He died in 1925, and his son, Westbury, took over his work for the Education Committee, as well as his private work, becoming the first full-time county architect sometime in the 1930s. A further generation of schools was designed by Westbury LloydJones, some labelled open-air school on the drawings, for example, Pwllheli in 1930 and Sarnbach in 1932, and others not named such, but clearly incorporating features from his father's schools, particularly the bay windows, for example, at Dolgarrog and Dolwyddelan in 1933 and Penygroes in 1939. Kley School in Alla Street, now the community centre, is quite interesting because it has two stories. The upper floor, a U-plan of classrooms with the open-air bay windows around a south-facing raised courtyard, which you can just see here above and beyond the balustrade. But in general, the schools of Westbury LloydJones are not a significant advance on the earlier pioneering generation. If anything, they are architecturally conservative and are in marked contrast to those schools which began to be influenced by architectural ideas from the continent, where functionalism was taking hold. The most famous open-air schools abroad were one in Amsterdam, built of concrete and glass in 1930 to 32. That's on the left there. And the open-air school at Suresnes, Paris, built in 1935-6, which is that one there. In Britain, the number grew during the 1930s and included the Hilary Hayworth Nursery School at Latch near Chester, Shoreham School, Sussex, and Bush House School, Isleworth, both 1938. And just go back a slide, Impington Village College, Cambridgeshire, on the right here, designed in 1939 by Walter Gropius and Maxwell Fry. The Westbury Lloyd-Jones did not rise to the challenge of taking the Caernarfonshire schools forward, at least on an architectural level, makes his father's achievements 2 decades earlier all the more remarkable. Roland LloydJones may not have designed the first open-air schools in the country, in Britain as a whole that is, as some of the newspapers proclaimed when Brynner High and Four Crosses were opened, but he was amongst the group of pioneering local authority architects across the whole of Britain who developed ways of providing schools that improved children's health. Today's schools may not look like these early open-air schools, but without a doubt they are indebted to them through the legislative changes that these early schools engendered. Back in 2012, when a version of this talk was published in the Transactions of the Caernarfonshire Historical Society, none of us had any inkling of what was to come, and this is where my article ended. Now, of course, life has changed, and I can't help thinking that the open air idea might not be totally old-fashioned and impractical. We may not be able to turn the clocks back to the time of our parents and grandparents, when walking to school was the norm, when acceptable indoor temperatures were considerably lower than they are today. But good ventilation of indoor space has become essential. The added problem we face today is the environmental one, meaning in simple terms that mechanical ventilation requires energy. What was so good about the open air schools was that ventilation was provided naturally. Perhaps the lesson to be learnt is that we do have to return to the past. Wearing more clothes, and clothes made of natural rather than synthetic materials, is one solution. And designing our buildings, including our schools, in such a way that the built fabric itself can regulate the internal environment without recourse to energy guzzling machinery is surely the way ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam. That was very interesting and informative indeed. It's intriguing thinking of the architect, that the county and the city architects are often those unsung heroes to a certain extent, thinking of the Bangor ones and the Anglesey ones. Very little has been written about them. I don't think none within the area have a monograph. It's extremely interesting, and I think it's a huge area of research on these individuals. You're prepared to answer questions, Adam, I assume?
Yes, I'll certainly give a go. I mean, I did all this research and writing more than 10 years ago. I don't know whether I can actually remember any of my facts, but I'd be very glad to give my best.
Yeah. No, where am I? There's nothing. Oops. No open questions as yet. The chat is an apology for the technical difficulties at the beginning. So I can't see that we've got any at the moment.
I mean, what's interesting to me is that, I mean, even when I recast my original article as a talk for today's Zoom session, little did I know that, you know, the COVID's kind of gone off the boil slightly, but here we are in a heat wave.
Yeah.
Raising serious questions, you know, making it all the more relevant.
Yeah, Sue's asking, why did the open air idea go out of fashion? Was it just a case of post-war schools adapting to new forms of ventilation? She's got a teacher sister who's currently baking. Surely climate change also points to a return to such ideals, which is exactly the point that you made, of course. But it's
yes. I wonder why it kind of disappeared. And I guess the main reason, of course, I mean, the kind of original instigation of the whole thing was tuberculosis and the poor health of children. I suppose as children as a whole got much more healthy than they ever have been, I suppose the kind of health giving properties of building just weren't relevant anymore.
Yeah. Elaine is asking, I know the schools are inspired by the German schools, but also is there any influence from the pavilion hospitals with cross ventilation? There's Penheskin on Anglesey, of course, is one of those, but I'm sure there's a number of others in the area, I think. So, again,
yeah, I didn't actually look at them. I mean, I was aware that in the health sector there was probably a lot of relevant parallels and parallel thought going on. I mean, I suppose the whole, as you say, Andrew, the whole subject would be worth. I mean, both this kind of form of building, but also your point about county architects, both very worthwhile areas of research needing to be done.
Lindsay's so she's interested in the chimneys. How did they work? Are there recorded oral histories about how the schools were regarded by children?
Interested in the what? The chimneys?
The chimneys, yeah.
Oh, I mean, I don't know there was anything special about the chimneys. I mean, this is the chimneys to the fireplaces.
I assume so. And did they drag the air through, perhaps? Is that what she's...
I don't know. I suppose there must have been... they must have realised that would work. But I mean, every classroom had a stove. I don't know that they were actually a kind of conscious ingredient in the kind of design, in the same way that the folding sliding windows, which were clearly a fairly innovative and also daring sort of thing to bring in.
Yeah. Sue's following up a earlier question, with the Welsh Government currently investigating millions in the Education for the 21st Century programme of school replacement. Is this something that's part of current discussions? Gosh, I certainly don't know, I'm afraid.
I don't know. I mean, surely it should be, but...
yeah, that's right, yes.
No,
and I like your comment about returning to sort of walking to school, simply because I remember very clearly walking to school every day. It was just over a mile, about a mile and a half. And it was just something we did. Didn't think about it, didn't question it.
Yeah, well, I mean, this brought back memories to me. I mean, I remember at my very, very first school, after lunch, going out, sleeping on lying on a camp bed for half an hour under some nice trees. Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah. John's asking, did you take those photographs and see for yourself to what extent the schools were used as originally designed? Sorry, what was the question in that? So the photographs, the visits that you made to the schools, could you see that they were built as and used as originally designed? So we've got the plans as to how they were designed. I see. Do you know, I'm not sure I was allowed into any school because, gates and fences and so on. I think maybe I got into Betws-y-Coed school, and I was particularly, did I or not? And I was obviously very keen to get into that school because of its windows and so on.
I don't remember now. I mean, I think I have a vague recollection of the marching corridor being pretty kind of actively used. Whether the big sliding doors between each classroom and the marching corridor, whether they were all working, I don't remember now. I mean, what tends to happen is that, you know, if you can imagine a classroom which has one solid wall facing north, and then the other three walls are sliding partitions, actually it's rather impractical in many ways. I mean, you can't, unless you're going to be, I mean, you just got so much pinned up on the walls.
Yeah.
And then once you do that, of course, then it means that you can't really slide them anymore. So I think that, yes, maybe they weren't taking full advantage,
yeah,
as originally intended, of course, but then, yeah.
Lindsay's asking, is there any reaction in the records as to how the staff, pupils viewed them? The closest we get now are one-off woodland schools in good weather. So.
Yes, no, I mean, I did try and look for comments in school logbooks and so on, but I think there was that one which where a report said they had dutifully kept the windows open all day. I don't remember a huge amount of kind of views from the staff.
Pamela's asking on ventilation and heating nowadays, how do we balance modern systems with user control? I'm aware of newly built schools that are energy efficient, but the users complain of hot and cold spots and nobody seems to know how to run the building. Tricky one, that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I should try and get this talk into the right circles, wherever they are.
Jonathan Vining, is there any information on how many days per year the classroom doors were opened, given the exposed North Wales climate?
I don't know. I did try and find out as much as I could in archives. I mean, both locally, I was also down in the British Library looking in for information. I think the problem is so much of schools, logbooks and you know, lists of pupils and all that sort of thing probably got chucked. I mean, you know, the amount of stuff is just you know, impractical to keep. There could be. I mean, one could spend ages looking into all this sort of stuff. It could be. Yes. But I rather suspect you wouldn't. You would come away disappointed.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm certainly not aware of actual queries to users, etc. Frances is well, she's reminding me first of all that chat is disabled, so if anybody wants to type in a question, put it into the question and answer box, please. And she's saying there's been much research in the reduced ability of children to learn when there is a buildup of carbon dioxide in the air, because fresh air is essential for concentration. I think marching about at intervals during the school day would also help many children who hate being obliged to sit still for many hours. There's evidence that some children learn better when walking, which is intriguing.
Marching down the corridors.
Yeah. I haven't checked the chat box. I don't know if there's. Lane's got a question, a second question here. Adam will be pleased to know that some schools still advocate outdoor lessons. My granddaughter's school in South Lakes aims to teach a lot of classes outside, but they're weather dependent.
Yeah, well, I mean, just on the news last night, there was plenty of Yeah, I can see kids being taken outside.
Yeah.
Under the trees. Lovely.
Right. I think we've reached the end. I hope I haven't missed any out. I don't think I have. I think we've reached the end of the questions. So in which case, I'd just like to thank you very much, Adam, for your talk and for the comprehensive answering the questions. Quite yes, quite intriguing questions, which show the relevance of what you've been talking about to the present day. So thank you very much indeed, Adam. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for attending. It's frustrating. I see there are 19 participants. I'm sorry I can't see you all, but thank you for coming. And I've enjoyed telling you about the schools.
You're okay to end things, Bethan?